Good evening, VB Nation. My name is Ryan and welcome to the channel. Now here at 6 p.m. we always talk about the stock market and how to make money and get prepared, be on the right side, all that good stuff so that way your portfolio can be successful. Now this week, Thursdays, we always do Semiconductor Thursdays, and tonight, I'm actually really excited about this video here. This is probably one of the most important things or items that the candidates, both political sides, will be concerned about going into 2025, and that is going to be the relationship between China and the United States when it comes to semiconductor manufacturing. Now, there is a key player here that is not represented by a flag behind me, and that is going to be Taiwan. That's right, Taiwan. They're the hub of TSM, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, which is the manufacturer for the likes of AMD, nvidia, some of the other big players. Apple does their M chips there. Intel does some of their higher end chips with TSM as well. So you can see that these three countries are embedded together economically, along with other factors here. But I'm going to show you some news articles, and I'm going to go into the VectorVest 7 system. We're going to take a look both at the stocks that are connected to TSM, see how they're responding to this news, as well look at the domestic manufacturers of the United States. Now, if this is something that you're interested in, stick around and let's get started. Now, before I start, I will say this, that on the VectorVest channel here, we don't really talk politics or get into politics much. But when it affects your wallet, when it affects the stock market, affects your portfolio, I am going to talk about the matter. Now, I will stay pretty independent in this video here. I am at work right now, but both sides of the aisle do have a major issue here, and we're going to touch on some articles. First, look at this article. China suspends nuclear talks with U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. That's right, U.S. backs Taiwan, military support, so that way China does not invade them. That would be huge problems. That would be catastrophic for the supply chain of the semiconductor industry and national security for when it comes to the United States. Because, even though, iPhones and, simple consumer electronics are important, now we have to remember that these computer chips are used for things like, guided missile systems, ICBM defense systems, satellites. So you can see exactly why these countries want the best chips and be in first place when it comes to the chips race. This article here, nvidia and other chip stocks tumble and report that the Biden administration is weighing tighter China trade restrictions. Now, we know that the China-US tension started it's been a couple decades in the making here, but really under the Trump presidency, as far as the semiconductor industry is concerned, has carried over into the Biden administration. And we've seen the headlines over the last 12 months or so with these restrictions, nvidia, AMD having to design new chips that would be allowed by these restrictions to be exported to China for their consumers. Now, when it comes to the other side of the aisle here, not much difference. You see J.D. Vance blames U.S. wage losses on China's effort to build its middle class. Now, what I find very interesting here, J.D. Vance from Ohio, well, that's actually where the new Intel chip fab plant is going to be built. So you can see exactly why J.D. Vance would want to support his base, especially his home state of Ohio here, and support the U.S. domestic chip manufacturers such as Intel, especially with the CHIP Act that was passed under the Biden administration. I believe it was like $50-60 billion where that money is going to be funneled into the United States to expand our fab production. Now, China not staying still, even though we invested about $50 billion, I have to look at the article again, maybe $60 billion at most. China has invested hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, although China has a lot more work to do, and when it comes to its allies politically, is rather isolated because, it all begins in the Netherlands with ASML, and then being a U.S. ally here, they are restricted on some equipment sent to China itself. And as far as TSM or Taiwan Semiconductor, we know how that story goes. US backs them. So you can see several countries are working together here to advance themselves and make sure that the dominance stays on the Western ally side rather than the Chinese government. Right here's the article. You can see Albany, Ohio. We've got 2 chip factories going there, and that investment, look at this, $28 billion. So I could clearly see the stance of the Republican ticket right now as far as the domestic chip manufacturing. But they do have to realize that with the United States so far behind right now, they can't just cut off ties with Taiwan at this time. This could easily take a decade or more for the United States companies to catch up with the manufacturing capabilities of Taiwan. Well, I'm sure you're sick of me talking about Taiwan. It is such a complex issue here, as the Communist Party of China does claim the island of Taiwan as theirs. However, Taiwan does not see it that way. They have their own government, hold their own elections. However, you can see from this article here, U.S. does not support Taiwan independence. And officially, they can't, just because we have such deep economic ties with China that would cause a lot of issues. So this leads me to my point here. Trump, we saw his comments about how Taiwan has been, stealing our chip business, our chip industry, and along with that said that Taiwan would have to step up and pay for the U.S. to protect it. So in my mind, I was wondering, how much do we actually spend on it? Well, we can see most recently, this article was from April 2024, so just a couple months ago, an $8 billion defense package was approved by the United States. Now, I did find this coming from a Congress website itself. We see that the State Department in 2023 notified Congress of its intent to obligate $135 million for Taiwan. And we see in 2024, no less than $300 million. So even though we're not recognizing them as a country, you can see the amount of money that we're spending to protect Taiwan has increased quite a bit here. Now, the package most recently, $8 billion, that is astronomically more than what we've seen in the past here. But what we have to understand is that a company like nvidia alone, again, that's a U.S. company traded on U.S. stock exchanges, is worth more than $1 trillion. That's one chip company, right? So does spending this money actually help the United States in creating jobs along with securing our supply chain if we can't produce the chips ourselves? Now, with all the money that the U.S. government is spending, me personally, I find this a good investment. A, for our supply chain, B, to keep inflation low, because if there were any issues with Taiwan, let's be honest, everything runs off computer chips and electronics. The prices of these items would skyrocket, hurting businesses and consumers. So I do see the argument for Taiwan to step up its efforts, which it has. Now, after the remarks from Trump, Taiwan officials did come out with a statement. Essentially, the statement was just saying how these two countries have, strong ties and how Taiwan is committed to defending itself. And if I scroll down as we dive deep into the article, one thing I did notice is that Taiwan did develop its own domestic submarine. This is its first submarine. I actually found this in another article, but it was mentioned here. And the budget for defense is at a historic high 2.5%. This is a country, let's be honest, that was not on the world stage, that most people probably never even heard of 15, 20 years ago. However, now it sits between the two most powerful countries in the world while producing the world's greatest technology, these advanced AI semiconductors. So you can see exactly why China is now interested in Taiwan all of a sudden, and can see why they need to step up their defense. US or not, they definitely would need to if they want to remain their dependence. Now, just to give you a visual how important Taiwan Semiconductor and how quickly it has rose to stardom, in the last decade. This was back in 2016. Global market share of the largest semiconductor vendors in 2016. Intel at the top of the list here, 15.9%. Samsung, 11.8%. We got Qualcomm. You see Broadcom here, Micron, Texas Instruments, NXP. So a lot of big names here, but what are we missing? Taiwan Semiconductors. And if we fast forward to recent years here, you see this big red bar? Guess who that is? Taiwan Semiconductor. You can see back in 2022, 59% of the market share, while currently in 2024, sitting at 62%. And I've seen reports when it comes to advanced AI chips, they are responsible for more than 90% of the market. So you can see why this company is so vital to not only the United States, but the rest of the world. The rest of the world wants their technology so that way they can stay ahead of the curve. And if we look down below, we can see the names have changed here. TSM in the number 1 place. Samsung remains in the number 2 place. Next, we've got UMC. This will be in the watch list later. It's a little known fab company based out of Taiwan, but you can see between the two, they've got close to 70% of the market share. Next up, we've got SMIC. This is a Chinese-led fab manufacturer. Global Foundries, I know you saw this pop yesterday quite a bit. This is going to be one of the largest domestic manufacturers at this time. Here's another visual. We can see TSM again around 60% as of 2023. Samsung second place. UMC, again, this is another chip fab from Taiwan at 6.7%. You see the one country alone here accounting for almost 70% of the computer chips. Global Foundry 6.7%, SMIC at 5.5%, and the other comes in around 10%. Now, Intel, from an article I saw, sits currently around 2% of the global market share when it comes to chip foundries. Now, this is an article from the Center of Strategic and International Studies. Semiconductor sales by country, this is in 2021 in billions. You can see United States having a dominance here of 46%. China sits at only 7%, while Taiwan comes in at 8%. Even though they do manufacture most of the computer chips, they don't actually design and sell them. That's where companies like nvidia, AMD, along with Intel, as like I said, TSM does produce some chips for Intel, Apple. But do you see a pattern here? We've got United States, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea. So all of these countries here are allies. China is the lone soldier in this race right now. When it comes to political allies, to get in the chip space, that is where they're having a problem. This chart here I really like, especially if you're new to the semiconductor industry as a whole. We can see the step one here is going to be design. That is where nvidia, AMD, those type of companies come in and shine. We see the software design as a part of that, along with intellectual property. And do you see this here? ARM architecture. If you watch my videos, you know I'm a huge fan of ARM. I believe in the company. Truly, I do. So ARM is in the list today. Now, step two is fabrication, and that's where the policies really come into place. Now, I just showed you articles where the United States is trying to bring the domestic manufacturing. I've made many videos in the past showing article after article where the United States is taking a lot of steps to bring chip manufacturing more domestically. Everything from investing in our own domestic chip manufacturers such as Intel, along with companies like TSM. That's right. A lot of the allies such as Japan, Europe, and the United States have made deals with Taiwan Semiconductor to where they would have to manufacture some of these chips in their countries. So Japan's getting one of those plants. We saw a plant in Germany for their automobiles, and Taiwan Semiconductor's main project being in Arizona. Here we are in the VectorVest 7 system. Before we talk about these stocks, I do just want to say that China does have bargaining power when it comes to the table for diplomacy between the US, Taiwan, and China itself. The reason why? Rare earth minerals. You've probably never heard of these unless you follow semiconductors like I do, but they are the minerals needed in order to produce semiconductor chips. And well, China happens to have a monopoly on that market. Depending on what website or news article, it's anywhere between 70 and 80% share of the rare earth mineral market. So they do have a seat at the table when it comes to these important decisions. Now, if we take a look at these stocks here, the ones highlighted that I have here are all the ones that are connected to TSM or Taiwan Semiconductor. We've got AMD, nvidia, SMCI, ARM, ASML. This is the company that provides the lithogram machines to TSM. And you see the chip designers here, the architect supplier being ARM. But what I'm noticing, look, ON Semiconductor up 1.87%. TXN, Texas Instrument, 1%. Global Foundries here, 2.91%. The best performing semiconductor stock right now is Intel, above 3%. That's why I say that, this space in general is a great space to be in. I mean, these companies are really good here. But as we get closer to the election time, candidates will be giving their opinion and positions on the Chinese-Taiwan-US relationship. And this is really going to have an impact on the semiconductor industry as a whole, as we've seen recently. But when looking at the companies, if we take a look at the forecasted growth rate and earnings, do you see all the double-digit high numbers on the list here? Other than Micron at 27%, most of them belong in what I'm going to coin the Taiwan Semiconductor Mafia, and essentially because all of these stocks rely on TSM or Taiwan Semiconductor. So these stocks do have the advantage of technological advances, giving them the edge and driving up, their forecasted growth rate earnings, even their forecasted sales. The companies struggling on the list here being Texas Instrument at -6%, Global Foundries here at -5%, and even a company in Taiwan here being UMC. This company doesn't do the advanced AI chips such as Taiwan Semiconductor, but does play a vital role producing other types of semiconductor chips. And down at the bottom, we do have SOXS here. This does short the semiconductor space. It is triple leveraged, up again today, 0.5% here. So you can see with politics getting in the mix here, creating some problems for the semiconductor industry. Now, I do believe these stocks are still great companies to invest in the long term, but just be careful because as news breaks, these companies will have wild swings. Now, if you found this video informative, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Again, my name is Ryan. It's always a pleasure, and I'll catch you next week. Have a good night.